Ric Flair collapses in California. Triple H rushes to the hospital. WWE legend Ric Flair has been rushed to a California hospital after collapsing due to an alleged drug overdose, all while secretly battling cancer. Triple H reportedly dropped everything to be by his side. Here's everything we know. In this emotional video, we break down the shocking details surrounding Ric Flair's latest health scare, his ongoing battle with cancer, and how WWE executives, including Triple H, are reacting behind the scenes. Ric Flair was never supposed to fade away quietly. At nearly 75, the man who once strutted in golden robes, shouting "Whoa" to arenas filled with adoring fans, now finds himself in a sterile hospital room in California, fighting for his life once again. But this time, it's different. This time, it's not just age. It's not just the battle scars of a life spent in the ring. This time, the Nature Boy collapsed suddenly, unexpectedly. And the whispers behind the curtain say it may be from something darker, an overdose, all while quietly, heartbreakingly, fighting cancer that no one knew he had. The news broke like a thunderclap across the wrestling world. Fans initially thought it was a hoax. Ric Flair? Down? Again? But confirmation arrived within hours. He had been rushed by emergency services to a Los Angeles hospital after collapsing at a private residence just outside Beverly Hills. Paramedics on the scene allegedly found Flair unresponsive, his pulse weak, his breathing shallow. EMTs acted fast, and according to sources close to the situation, his life may have been saved by mere seconds. But that wasn't the most shocking part. It was what doctors reportedly discovered after stabilizing him, a potential drug overdose, mixed with dangerously advanced symptoms of an undiagnosed cancer, allegedly kept secret even from those closest to him. As the sun rose on a quiet Los Angeles morning, the WWE universe was anything but calm. Messages flooded social media. Fans posted their favorite Ric Flair memories. Superstars tweeted out prayers. Hashtags like #PrayForRic and #NatureBoy started trending before official statements could even catch up. It didn't take long before insiders confirmed the most jaw-dropping detail. Triple H, Flair's longtime friend, rival, and WWE executive, immediately left an ongoing board meeting in Stamford, Connecticut, and boarded a private jet to California. No press release. No cameras. Just a desperate, loyal friend trying to reach the man who meant everything to him before it was too late. Triple H, who has known Ric Flair for decades, wasn't acting as a company executive that day. He was acting as family. The two men have had their differences over the years on screen and off, but what they share is deeper than wrestling. Flair mentored him, laughed with him, bled beside him. When Triple H founded Evolution, he didn't choose Flair to be the wise elder of the group just for storyline purposes. It was real. It was respect. And now, hearing that the man he once called his wrestling father was collapsing alone in California, he couldn't stay away. One anonymous WWE staffer reportedly said, "Hunter didn't even finish his coffee. He just stood up, looked at everyone, and said, 'I have to go.'" Inside the hospital, things were tense. While the initial reports were guarded, more details soon began to leak from the medical staff, unofficially, of course. Ric Flair had apparently been feeling ill for weeks. He'd canceled multiple public appearances. Some chalked it up to age. Others assumed it was exhaustion. But those closest to him now suspect something far more heartbreaking. Ric had been hiding the severity of his illness, possibly out of pride or fear. He had allegedly been battling a rare, aggressive form of cancer and chose not to disclose it. Perhaps because he didn't want to be seen as weak, or maybe because he didn't want sympathy. But whatever the reason, his silence only added to the emotional weight now crashing down on those around him. There's also speculation about the alleged overdose. One insider close to the situation said that Ric may have been self-medicating to ease the pain, both physical and emotional. If true, it paints a devastating picture of a man who once stood tall before millions, now suffering alone in silence. The combination of painkillers and a weakened immune system may have pushed his body to the edge. And when that edge gave way, all that remained was a shell of the Nature Boy, broken, breathless, and nearly gone. The wrestling world, known for its bravado, ego, and toughness, has a complicated relationship with vulnerability. And Ric Flair, in many ways, represents both the peak and the price of that culture. He was the showman, the icon, the blueprint for every cocky champion that came after him. But the same fire that made him great also burned him from the inside. Over the decades, Flair battled alcohol abuse, financial ruin, failed marriages, and near-death experiences. Yet somehow, he always found a way back to the ring, always found a way to say, "Whoa, one more time." But now, as doctors monitor every heartbeat, every breath, the question isn't whether Ric Flair can make another comeback, it's whether he even wants to. When Triple H finally arrived at the hospital, witnesses say the mood changed. Staff recognized him immediately, but there were no press moments, no fanfare. He walked in quietly, made his way to the ICU, and stood at the foot of Ric's bed. What was said between them remains private, as it should be. But one nurse who was present described the moment simply. He looked like a son seeing his father for the last time. Others in the room reportedly saw tears. Real tears. From a man who built his image on being tough, in control, unshakable. But grief doesn't care about image. And for Triple H, this was personal. Behind the scenes, WWE went into crisis mode. Executives debated how much to reveal. Should they acknowledge Flair's condition publicly? Would they risk fans assuming the worst? Or worse, would the truth eventually leak from someone else? Internally, the company's leadership was said to be emotionally rattled. Multiple superstars, especially those mentored by Flair, reached out to express concern. Charlotte Flair, his daughter and one of WWE's top female superstars, was reportedly inconsolable after getting the call. She had been preparing for a media tour but dropped everything to be with her father. She is, after all, her father's daughter, both proud and resilient, but this news shook her to her core. Back in the hospital, medical staff continued fighting to stabilize Ric's condition. Initial tests revealed severe dehydration, liver stress, and cardiac irregularities. Symptoms consistent with both long-term illness and acute drug toxicity. Treatment began immediately, but doctors remained cautious. He's in critical but stable condition, one source shared. But the next 48 hours are crucial. Those hours ticked by slowly, each second weighed down by uncertainty. Friends kept vigil in the waiting room. Security tightened. The nature boy was now the patient no one dared to give up on. Fans began gathering outside the hospital, some holding signs, others just standing quietly. A few played clips of his old matches on their phones, watching the younger Ric Flair, blonde, fierce, immortal, body-slamming opponents and wooing into the camera. That version of Flair felt like a lifetime ago. Now, lying still in a hospital bed, hooked to machines and monitors, was a man whose body had absorbed every bump, every chair shot, every blade job, and every mile of the road. A body that had given everything to this industry. And now it was asking for help. Triple H stayed by Ric's side as long as hospital rules allowed. When he left the room, his face was pale, his jaw clenched. He took a call from WWE headquarters, gave a short update, and then, according to a source, sat in the hospital chapel for nearly an hour. Not as a boss, not as a legend, but as a man quietly praying for another man who had given him everything. And still, no official statement had been made. The silence from WWE was deafening, but perhaps necessary. Some things are too real for press releases. Some pain demands space before it becomes public. The truth is, Ric Flair's legacy isn't just in the titles, the robes, or the catchphrases. It's in the people who stood in his shadow and learned to shine. It's in the respect he earned from those who knew the real man behind the character. And in this moment, as he lay fighting a battle few even knew he was facing, that legacy came into sharper focus. He was more than the nature boy. He was Fred Phillips. He was a survivor. And he was, perhaps, at his most vulnerable and most human, outside the hospital. The sun dipped below the California skyline, casting long shadows over a building now surrounded by silence, concern, and emotional chaos. Inside, Ric Flair remained under constant watch. the medical team administering fluids, running tests, and keeping a close eye on his heart rate, which had reportedly dipped dangerously low during the initial collapse. Nurses whispered. Doctors moved with urgency. Every beep of a monitor was a reminder of how close the world had come to losing one of its most iconic figures. And still, WWE remained officially quiet, no press conference, no statement, no tweet. Just the growing weight of unspoken fear, but not everyone was silent. Behind the scenes, those closest to Ric were breaking. Some in whispers, others in sobs. Charlotte Flair, his daughter and arguably the closest person to him, had arrived at the hospital by the evening. Paparazzi had spotted her at LAX just hours earlier, escorted by security, face hidden behind sunglasses, but clearly shaken. By the time she made it to the ICU, her presence reportedly overwhelmed her father with emotion. Despite his weakened state, sources claim Ric managed to squeeze her hand. No words. Just that. A flicker of life. A father reaching out to his daughter from the edge of darkness. For Charlotte, this wasn't just another scare. This was personal on a level the cameras and the fans would never truly understand. Ric wasn't just her dad, he was her hero, her teacher, her partner in the legacy of wrestling. Her style, her promos, even her walk carried echoes of him. And now, seeing him pale and hooked up to machines, fighting for every breath, shattered the persona she had spent years building. Because in that moment, she wasn't the queen. She was just a daughter watching the strongest man she knew fade before her eyes. Backstage at WWE, morale was plummeting. Wrestlers, producers, and even ring crew were reportedly gathering in locker rooms and hallways, reading updates, waiting for texts, asking questions. For many of them, Ric Flair wasn't just a legend from the past. He was a mentor who had walked with them through the early days of their careers. His charisma was infectious. His lessons unforgettable. And even though Flair hadn't been in the ring full-time in years, his presence still hovered over WWE like a shadow that never faded. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread. Was this the end? Was this Ric Flair's final fight? Had he known this was coming? Whispers claimed that he had been in more pain than anyone realized for months, maybe years. That his health had declined drastically after his last match in 2022, when he suffered a near-fatal heart attack in the middle of the ring. That perhaps he'd taken the booking to feel alive one last time, but that the cost had finally caught up with him. But the darkest whisper of all? That Ric Flair had given up. That the weight of aging, of sickness, of being forgotten by the very world he helped build, had finally broken him. That the drugs weren't just about pain. That maybe, just maybe, they were about silence. About escape. About going out on his terms. TripleH, however, refused to believe that. According to one staffer, he kept pacing the hospital corridor, muttering to himself, "Ric's not done. Not like this." For him, and for so many others, Ric Flair symbolized everything WWE stood for: flamboyance, resilience, grit. Watching him lay helpless in a hospital bed didn't just hurt. It felt wrong. It felt like watching Superman bleed. As news slowly trickled into the public, fans began to gather in cities across the country. Candlelight vigils were held in Atlanta, Charlotte, even outside WWE headquarters in Stamford. Wrestling forums flooded with tributes. "He made my childhood magical," one fan wrote. "He was the first reason I believed in wrestling," said another. Videos of his greatest promos circulated like wildfire. The limo riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheelin' dealin' son of a gun, now reduced to a man barely hanging on. The contrast was jarring. But it was real. It was raw. And for the first time, fans saw the man behind the ropes. Medical experts released no official diagnosis, but internal reports from hospital staff paint a grim picture. Ric's alleged drug intake, combined with dehydration, cancer-related complications, and years of damage from wrestling, had left his body weak and vulnerable. One nurse reportedly said, "It's a miracle he made it here alive." And yet, he had. Because Ric Flair always had a habit of cheating death, this wasn't the first time the Nature Boy had danced with the Reaper. In 2017, he had been placed in a medically induced coma after emergency bowel surgery triggered kidney failure and sepsis. Doctors gave him a 20% chance to survive. But he came back. He always did. That was Ric Flair, too stubborn to die, too proud to quit. And now, in 2025, the question lingered once more. Could he do it again? Triple H and Charlotte weren't alone for long. Over the next 24 hours, more wrestling figures began to arrive quietly. Shawn Michaels, a man who gave Ric one of the most emotional retirement matches in WWE history, was spotted entering the hospital late that night. Batista, another Evolution protege, flew in from Tampa. Even Randy Orton reportedly called in from his vacation, offering to return early if needed. Everyone who ever shared the ring with Ric seemed to be showing up or reaching out. Because this wasn't just about Ric Flair the wrestler. It was about Ric Flair the man. In the middle of all this chaos, Ric briefly opened his eyes. It was short, only a few seconds, but long enough for Charlotte to call the nurse. Long enough for Triple H to step forward and whisper something only Ric could hear. What he said remains unknown. But afterward, Hunter sat down and finally allowed himself to cry. Outside the hospital, a new storm was brewing. Reporters and media outlets began crowding the entrance, seeking confirmation. WWE, under immense pressure, released a short statement at 3:17 a.m. PST. WWE is aware of reports concerning Ric Flair's health. Out of respect for his family, we are not releasing any details at this time. We ask fans and media to allow Mr. Flair the privacy he deserves. Our thoughts are with him and his loved ones. It was vague, purposefully so. But it confirmed what everyone feared. This wasn't a drill. Ric Flair's life was truly on the line. Charlotte later posted a photo on Instagram. It showed nothing but her hand gripping her father's. No caption. No emojis. Just raw emotion. Within minutes, the post garnered over 1 million likes, tens of thousands of comments, and an avalanche of prayers. Wrestling had always been about stories. And this, tragically, had become one of the most real, most gut-wrenching stories the WWE Universe had ever seen. Inside Ric Flair's private hospital room, the lights were dimmed, the hum of machines steady and mechanical. A cruel contrast to the electricity he once brought into every arena he ever walked into. Now, that larger-than-life presence was fighting a battle no crowd could cheer him through. Doctors moved in hushed tones, their focus unshakable. Nurses tiptoed in and out. And in the corner of the room sat Charlotte Flair, her shoulders slumped, but her fingers never releasing his hand. She had grown up around pain, around the chaos of being Ric Flair's daughter. But nothing prepared her for this. Elsewhere in the hospital, Triple H was making calls, not to the media, not to the public, but to those who needed to know. WWE Chairman Nick Khan had been briefed. Medical professionals on WWE's payroll were contacted to review Ric's condition, offering any assistance the hospital might need. Vince McMahon, despite his recent retirement and the complicated history he shares with Flair, had reportedly reached out from his Florida estate. According to one insider, Vince's voice trembled. "He's Ric Flair," he said. "He's not supposed to go out like this." But mortality doesn't care about legacies. It doesn't care about title reigns. It comes for everyone, even the Nature Boy, and yet, the world waited with bated breath. No official diagnosis was confirmed. Doctors were still running scans, observing organs, managing pain. But among those close to the family, the whispers grew darker. The cancer rumor, once speculative, had gained weight. Sources close to the Anoa'i family, longtime allies of the Flairs, claimed that Ric had been battling cancer for months, if not longer. A form of lymphoma, they said. Quietly spreading. Stealing his strength day by day. He had apparently sworn those closest to him to secrecy, refusing to be treated like a charity case, refusing to be seen as weak. "The world doesn't need to know," he reportedly told one friend. "They only need to remember me as I was." And perhaps that's what made it so devastating. Ric Flair had spent decades building an identity so bulletproof, so untouchable, that the thought of him dying in silence, alone, sick, addicted, and exhausted, felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. And yet, it was real. It was happening. Wrestlers began paying tribute not because he had passed, but because, in their hearts, many believed they were nearing that moment. AJ Styles tweeted a photo of his first match backstage with Ric looking on. Kevin Owens posted a simple message, "We're not ready to lose you, Ric." Even rivals from the past, like Chris Jericho and Bret Hart, broke their silence with heartfelt words of love and respect. The WWE roster felt the weight of it. The fans felt the weight of it. Because no matter how scripted wrestling may be, this pain was real. By day 2, Ric's condition had stabilized, though he remained unconscious. The ICU had tightened restrictions. No media. No unofficial visits. Only family and the most trusted inner circle were allowed through those doors. That included Charlotte, TripleH, and a surprising guest, Shawn Michaels. The Heartbreak Kid, who retired Ric Flair in one of the most emotional matches in WrestleMania history, had flown in on the first available flight. And when he walked into the hospital room, he reportedly whispered, "I'm sorry I had to say goodbye once, Ric. Don't make me do it again." No cameras captured the moment. But if they had, they would have seen 3 icons of wrestling, Charlotte Flair, TripleH, and Shawn Michaels, standing at the edge of the bed of a fourth, their emotions etched into every wrinkle, every glance, every pause in their breath. There was no ego in that room. Just love. Raw, uncomfortable, beautiful love. Meanwhile, behind closed doors at WWE headquarters, conversations had turned to contingency. What if Ric didn't make it? How would they honor him? Should there be a tribute show? A Hall of Fame induction ceremony held in advance? It felt premature, maybe even disrespectful, but it had to be discussed. If we lose Ric Flair, one producer said, we lose a piece of what built us. Executives began preparing packages. Footage from Starrcade, WrestleMania, WCW Nitro. Audio bites. Chance. The legacy already being stitched together in case the unthinkable happened, but Ric Flair wasn't done fighting. On the 3rd day, the doctors reportedly saw something. A response. A flicker of awareness. He began breathing more steadily. His heart rhythm, while still delicate, had stabilized. And that's when it happened, what Charlotte would later call the moment everything changed. She leaned in to adjust his blanket. Her voice shook as she said, "Daddy, it's okay. You can rest." And Ric Flair, against all medical odds, opened his eyes. They were red. Dull. Distant. But they were open. And through cracked lips, dry from the ventilator, he whispered, "Don't you dare cry for me." Whoa. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. But it was him. Ric Flair. Still here. Still fighting. Even from the edge of death, he found the will to be Ric Flair again. The room erupted in emotion. Nurses smiled. Charlotte wept. TripleH squeezed Ric's shoulder, leaned down, and said, "You scared the hell out of us, old man." Flair tried to smirk. He didn't have the strength, but he had the spirit. The moment was brief, his energy still depleted, but it was enough. Enough to give the world hope. Within hours, word had gotten out. WWE issued a second statement. Ric Flair has regained consciousness and is showing signs of recovery. He remains under close medical supervision. We ask fans to continue keeping him in their thoughts. The Nature Boy isn't done yet. The world responded instantly. Social media exploded. Fans cheered. Hashtags trended again, this time with words of hope. WeNation, one user posted, "We don't bury Ric Flair. Ric Flair buries death." But even in celebration, caution remained. Doctors warned that Ric's road ahead would be long and brutal. Detoxing from whatever drugs were in his system. Managing the cancer. Strengthening his heart. Rebuilding what decades of wear, pain, and pride had broken down. And at his age, the margin for error was razor-thin. Still, he was alive. Still Ric Flair. Later that night, Charlotte shared another post. It was a short video of her holding Ric's hand. In the background, he could be heard whispering, barely audible, "You tell em, I ain't done stealin' and profilin' yet." And the world believed him. As the days passed, Ric Flair's hospital room transformed from a place of crisis to a shrine of quiet celebration. He wasn't out of the woods, not by a long shot, but his recovery had begun. Doctors were cautiously optimistic. The initial scans revealed that the cancer, while advanced, hadn't yet spread to every part of his body. They still refused to confirm a diagnosis publicly, but behind the scenes, specialists were already exploring treatment options. Chemotherapy, immunotherapy, a potential trial. But none of that mattered in the moment as much as the simple truth that Ric Flair had opened his eyes, had spoken, had fought back. For Triple H, those days in California became a time of reflection. He stayed longer than planned, missing meetings, reshuffling obligations. WWE executives urged him to return. There was work to do, scripts to review, live shows approaching. But Hunter refused. "Rick needs me more than they do," he reportedly told Stephanie McMahon. And she understood. Because the bond between Triple H and Ric Flair went far beyond the ropes. It was forged in sweat, trust, and unspoken brotherhood. In the quiet hours of the night, Hunter would sit by Rick's bed, sometimes talking, sometimes just watching. When Rick dozed off, he'd check his vitals. When he stirred, Hunter would whisper, "Still got a little fight left in you, huh?" Back home, the wrestling community held its collective breath. WWE began softly preparing a special Raw segment, just in case. A tribute video was being edited quietly in Stamford, while another team began designing a possible Ric Flair appreciation night for a future SmackDown. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the company was clearly readying itself for the worst and the best, two opposing realities colliding with every update from the hospital. But then, on the fourth night, something happened that no one expected. Ric Flair asked for a mirror. It was a small request, delivered in a raspy voice that barely made it above the beeping of machines. At first, the nurse thought he was confused. But Charlotte smiled. "That's him," she said. "That's Dad." And sure enough, as he was handed the mirror, Rick slowly raised it to see himself, pale, wrinkled, battered by life, by sickness, by overdose, and by time. And yet, he grinned. "Damn, I still got it," he whispered, weak but defiant. That's when the nurse knew. This man wasn't just recovering. He was staging a comeback. He didn't want to be remembered in silence. He didn't want pity or memorials. He wanted one more mic, one more crowd, one more shot to remind the world who he was. He was Ric Flair, the stealin', profilin', limousine ridin', jet flyin', kiss stealin', wheelin' and dealin' son of a gun. And he wasn't going out in a hospital bed. Word of that moment reached the WWE office within hours. And that's when the mood shifted. Writers paused their stories. Production teams started planning a special entrance video, just in case. Vince, who had remained quiet through it all, reportedly said to one executive, "If Ric Flair walks through that curtain one more time, I want it filmed like it's the second coming." Still, the road ahead would be brutal. Rick's body, according to medical professionals, had aged far beyond his years. Cancer treatments would weaken him further. The toll of decades of alcohol, stress, and trauma could not be undone overnight. But he had something more powerful than any medicine: resolve. Pure, stubborn, Ric Flair resolve. Meanwhile, Charlotte made the decision to pull out of her scheduled WWE appearances indefinitely. Her focus was entirely on her father. "I'm not leaving his side," she told friends. "He was there for my rise. I'll be here for his fight." For WWE, the absence of one of their biggest stars was a blow, but no one argued. Because everyone understood what Ric Flair meant, not just to wrestling, but to the people who were wrestling. The fans, too, had taken up arms not with pitchforks, but with love. Get-well cards poured into the hospital. Handmade posters. Drawings from children who'd only known Ric Flair through YouTube clips, but still saw him as a giant. "Dear Mr. Rick," one note read, "You're my dad's hero. He says you beat everybody. So I think you can beat this too." That letter was taped to the wall beside Ric's bed, where he could see it every day. By the end of the first week, doctors had a plan. Flair would need to stay in the hospital for at least another 2 weeks, followed by several months of outpatient care. Cancer treatments would begin gently at first, monitoring how his fragile body responded. Pain management would continue under tight supervision. And the substance that may have contributed to his collapse? It was out of his system. Detoxed. Gone. Replaced by careful doses of monitored medication. But Ric didn't just want to survive. He wanted to speak. And that became the goal. With the help of speech therapists and nurses, he began practicing his vocal strength. A few syllables at a time. He whispered catchphrases. He mimicked commentary lines. He even started asking questions about current WWE